excited to have right now both Laura and Misa joining us. I would love if both of you could just take a minute to introduce yourselves.
Sure. I don't know if I'm on the top of the screen for everybody, but I'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So hi, everyone. I'm super excited, and thanks so much, Jackie, for putting this together. So I am Laura Weimer. I'm a West Point class of 2003. I'm a military police officer, and I forgot to mention this before, but I did the master's program when I was in the captain's career course, which I think is somewhat of an easy one to navigate for folks. But then I also did a master's in sociology at Duke, which was part of going back to teach at West Point in the Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership. And that degree was from 2011 to 2013. And I am just about to start in about a week and a half my PhD in management at Harvard Business School. And that, again, is in line with going back to teach at West Point as a senior rotating faculty and potentially then applying as a permanent professor.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Misa Lock. Thanks for having me. Formerly Yarmy, so some people may remember me as that. I'm class of 2010. I branched aviation. I fly Apaches. And the grad school that I'm attending currently is Kansas State University. So I'm about halfway done with my degree right now. I did half of it while still on active duty serving as a aide to camp. And then I'm going to do my second half as a resident student. My major is security studies, which is kind of like a mixture of political science and history. And sorry if you hear my dog crying.
It's a side effect of having a Zoom conference call. That's what happens. Dogs are in the work. Laura, I'm assuming your cats don't make too much noise.
No, and I'm actually still at school. So it was just, it was a nice spot. I was doing some work. I just planned to not have to move too much, but yeah, my cats are probably sleeping.
Yeah, I had to let them in because they wouldn't be at the door with it shut, so.
So I'm curious, I know both of you have taken kind of different paths into your graduate studies. What motivated you to attend graduate school?
So I can start with this one. For me, what motivated me for graduate school, I was currently serving as a general's aide, and while yes, that is a broadening position, I felt like I was not really getting much out of it in terms of career, benefits, trying to better myself. I was kind of like a glorified personal assistant, and I found, especially with all the travel, that I had a lot of free time on my hands. So I really wanted to do something that would further my career. Additionally, while I was doing that, my fiance, now husband, he was at CGSC finishing up his MBA at KU. So seeing that he was able to kind of make it all work, I couldn't let him be the only one with a graduate degree. So I decided I wanted to start getting into that. And the good thing about Fort Leavenworth is they cater to military students at the Ed Center with CGSC right there. So I had a lot of different options in different schools. I chose security studies and K-State because it looked like it was challenging. It was a rigorous curriculum. And if I eventually wanted to apply CGSC credits, I could. I had that option. So I had a little more flexibility. Additionally, they offered nighttime classes, which was essential because I really couldn't get out of work to go do some of those. So it wasn't 100% online. I was able to actually do some night classes as well, which was important to me.
So Misa, what was your undergrad major?
Oh, so my undergrad major was in engineering psychology, so BSNL. So nothing like this. But I actually had grad so originally, and that was one of the paths that I potentially would have chosen. But as I looked at the Kansas area and where my fiance was stationed and trying to get there weren't a lot of good options. So I actually ended up getting the aide to camp job. So I deferred or declined using my grad so. So just kind of went with something that I liked. I liked Soch. I was a weirdo, I know. And I liked, mill art and those kind of things. So looking at something that was a little mixture of both, I figured it would be a good fit.
Yeah, so you didn't necessarily apply your undergraduate degree, but some other things that you learned in undergraduate school that you thought were of interest, that's what
yes. Yeah, my social paper was my writing sample, so it actually worked out quite well.
That's awesome. What about you, Laura? Obviously, you attended graduate school in order to teach at BSNL, but why was that a path you wanted to take?
Yeah, I will say I did not have a writing sample from undergrad because I was a chemistry major. So it's interesting. I definitely pursued graduate school because I wanted to go back and teach. And I think that was kind of my initial motivation, where I wanted to give back. I really enjoyed a lot of my professors when I was in undergrad, across all of the different disciplines. So I knew I wanted to go back, but it really was during my second deployment to Iraq where it was time to start doing applications for West Point, but I was pretty sure, no, I was absolutely sure I didn't want to study chemistry any further. I was a pre-med major. I had fallen in love with leadership and the operational Army. So I was trying to think through, what I wanted to do, and through those deployments and really just kind of observing some of the different social dynamics, that's where I really kind of discovered sociology. And so that's where I was applying back to BSNL to teach both leadership and sociology. And that's what I pursued. And part of it, I was trying to think of, what would I be interested in studying? What do I think would be something that would be inspirational and beneficial to cadets? And then what could I, give back to the Army? So how could I, invest in myself as an officer and in the Army? And I really, honestly, to jump like 10 questions ahead, I think that's one of the things that I've gotten from grad school is, I feel like I've just become a more broad perspective, just a better person and a better officer from honestly studying sociology, but some of the nuances of being out of our element and, interacting with, the truly civilian population, and broadening myself a little bit. So that was kind of my initial reasoning. Now I've refined my interest a little bit. I really, really enjoyed teaching both leadership and sociology at West Point. And then I had to figure out, do I want to stay operational? Or do I want to go back and teach? And that's kind of in line with figuring out what are your career goals? How does graduate school fit in with that? And that's one of the decisions that I have made, is to continue to pursue the academic and research and teaching path. And as I taught PL 300, which most everyone on here will know what that is, I fell in love with looking at the individual level of, what affects the behaviors of our subordinates, of our, junior leaders. And that's really what I'm going to be studying now is what are those psychological or sociological elements that are influencing people, and how can leaders best leverage those, not only to help the organization perform, but to get that best sense of fulfillment and meaning for their people that they're working with. So that's, you can kind of see just some of the things that I'm passionate about. So the reasons why I pursued grad school at different stages and what I studied, I think really has evolved from chemistry all the way till now.
What I think is really interesting, both Misa and Laura, in your stories, is that you took a completely different path than what you did in undergrad. And it sounds for both of you like the reasoning for that was, how can I be most useful as an Army officer? What can I study that I can leverage that can make me even more effective in my current career moving forward?
Exactly.
So when we think about, obviously you guys have described a little bit about what made you choose the degree that you're studying in graduate school, but how did you consider schools?
I'll go ahead. And I think it's interesting because I've done a lot of reflection now that I've done this process twice. And I think part of it is, it was just a very different season in my life, but also a very different end state. So going for a master's, I really didn't have kind of the intent or the desire to get a PhD, both when I started as well as during my time. So when I initially looked at schools for sociology, I took a lot of recommendations from the department there at West Point because I didn't know a lot about sociology. So I wanted to understand, what did they value? What did they need me to study? Which they were very open-minded and said, find something that you're interested in, bring it back and share it with everybody. So that was really empowering. So I did a little bit of research and just tried to, really peruse some of the sociology programs. Part of it is the programs that sometimes are familiar with the Army, which is not an absolute necessity, because you can navigate that, and some of the people within the Army, whether it's HRC or West Point or CGSC or whomever, can help navigate that and advocate that for you. But part of the big things that I looked at, was location, someplace that I would really enjoy living. That was someplace that I couldn't live when I was in the military. So the second time around, now I'm in a city, I'm in Boston, which is something that I'm really enjoying. And then the third thing for my first time around was I wanted to go to a really good sports school. I just really enjoy whether it was football or basketball. So it came down to, I went to Duke, just absolutely loved college basketball. And that, how I interacted with my peers, I went to a ton of basketball games. But not to go too long, the second time that I applied, it was much more deliberate. It was, going for your PhD, you kind of have to understand their language, understand their world. And to be honest, I did 2 years of applications. I applied to 7 or 9 programs my first year and didn't get accepted anywhere. And some of the things that I did the second time around was I just got to know the programs a lot more, starting to learn some of the personality of the programs, which you can't always see on a website. Reached out to a couple students and even junior professors. But I did take a look at who was studying the things that I was interested in. And I didn't apply to some, great schools. I would have loved to gone to Northwestern, but there wasn't anybody there that was interested in some of the same things I was. That when you're doing a PhD or an in-depth master's program, you really have to find people that are doing the things that you're doing. And this time around, I kind of looked at a school that didn't have really good sports because I only have 3 years and I know myself as far as distractions. So those are just a couple of things I looked at.
I think that's a great point, Laura, the idea that are people studying what you want to be studying? And are people going to support you in that process, and how important that is, particularly at the doctoral level. What about you, Misa?
So when I initially applied for grad school, I didn't have the idea that I would be doing it in person. I figured I'd start it, maybe I wasn't sure what I would be doing after my aide job, so I figured I'd probably either stick around Fort Leavenworth or figure something out, and I figured I would probably complete it in line with CGSC. So that was always the original plan. And I really liked K-State because more than KU, they offered 12 credit hours from CGSC instead of 6. So very, very simple in that sense. Additionally, it's very affordable. So the total cost, they say out front what it is. And I think for the whole degree, it was, like 20,000 something, in the 20,000 range, which is crazy compared to some places that, it's way higher. So definitely the affordability of it as well. So I wanted something flexible. So that's kind of why I looked at just doing it part-time, and then I would be able to finish it up whenever I did CGSC. So I'm currently, they're doing my board now. So I won't be going to CGSC until the next year. So I had this kind of weird year where I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I'm really happy I ended up picking K-State because as my husband looked at what he was going to do after CGSC, he ended up being fortunate to get stationed at Fort Riley. So being still newlyweds and trying to start our family, it's very nice to be stationed together. That's an important little piece of it. So we know we won't always get that, so we're very fortunate. And then also knowing that eventually, if I do go to CGSC, it's only 2 hours down the road from where he's at in Manhattan. It just gives us a little more flexibility. So a little bit of the school went into it, and then also kind of making sure it was the best fit for my family and how that would work. Additionally, my program that I'm in is actually a really good program. It's ranked 6th in the nation for security studies degrees. So, like it's not Georgetown, they're number 2, but it's still very well ranked, and it's a good program. So that was another reason why I liked K-State.
But Misa, I think you bring up so many points about what works for your family, what works for the kind of season in your life that you're in, and then you raise a really good point about just because a school is a top tier school doesn't mean it's a top tier school for a program specific.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
paying attention to name brand school in a particular degree field may or may not matter. You know, maybe Harvard's not the best for every degree that you're interested in, and maybe it's better to go to a school that may not be as well known broadly, but for that specific area is really important. So really looking at what degrees are you pursuing, why are you pursuing them, and then where best for that specific degree, I think is a really good highlight.
Exactly.
Misa, can you say a little bit more about how you're funding your grad school?
So I started off with tuition assistance. So I kind of break down my grad school into before degree completion and then after. So while I was serving as an aide, I took 2 courses per semester, and then 1 course over the summer while I was kind of in the middle of PCSing. So out of those 2 courses, 1 was online. 1 was where we would meet in a classroom setting at Fort Leavenworth with the CGSC students that were also in the program. We'd video in with the people that were over here in Manhattan, Kansas. Additionally, it was very helpful because I could zoom in like we are right now while I was traveling, which was a lot as an aide. So it was very, very helpful. So for the first 2 semesters that I had, I used tuition assistance. So tuition assistance gives $750 per course. So for that, all of the tuition assistance that I had, $3,000 went towards my overall cost of my degree. For the summer term, because I was kind of in the middle of PCSing and I was kind of right on the line of where the regulation is for degree completion, I just self-funded. It was just an online class, so I paid that one out of pocket. And then degree completion program, it's funny because every time I tell people I'm doing it, they're like, that's still around, that exists, what is that? And it's one of those things that you dig in. The reg, I think, is from like 2006, so it hasn't been updated, but it's basically where the Army will let you go complete your degree, but you have to self-fund it. If you are doing a graduate degree, you do have to have a utilization tour if you have greater than 365 days of school. Since I completed that summer term, I actually have 257 days, so I will be right in line with my career track to go to CGSC and then continue on to my unit. So especially as an aviation officer, that was very important and a very big decision when I was looking at how I was going to go about it. So even though degree completion, I am self-funding, I do have the option if I wanted to use the GI Bill, I could, but I'm choosing to save that for future children and things like that. I'm actually serving the 4-year ADSO right now for transferring because my husband and I are both active duty. We're able to transfer to each other, start that ADSO, and then when we have children, we can transfer to the children. So helpful little hint if anyone's thinking about doing that.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea. I hadn't heard that one before. So if I understood you correct, Misa, just to make sure everybody's clear out there. So you were doing degree completion. You started your graduate degree, did it essentially a year plus of graduate studies, either using tuition assistance or self-funding. And now you essentially have, quote unquote, 257 days off from the Army, being paid by the Army, and you're funding your graduate school.
Yep, and I'm still getting flight pay and everything, because I've still done all of my things that I need to do as an aviator, doing my flight physical and things like that. So I mean, I'm still getting all of my BAH, everything that I would get as if I were showing up to a unit every single day. But so, I mean, that's nice, especially living with my husband, we get to use some of that money to save up and put towards school. And the good thing with K-State, like I said, is it is so cheap that for this entire year, for about 15 credit hours that I have, it's only going to be about $8,000.
And how did you apply for degree completion? How does that work?
So it's essentially going through your branch manager. So thankfully, my branch manager is one of my friends who was a commander with me in Hawaii. So he was very helpful, and he helped me do a lot of the research. Because like I said, it's kind of an underutilized program. A lot of people use ACS or GradSo or some other type of way to do the graduate. But degree completion, the biggest stipulation is that you have to have started that degree and have a plan to finish it within 18 months. So like I said, I had already finished a decent amount. I had a plan going forward, and that was a big step. So really all it was to apply was a memo saying, here's how many credit hours I've done, here's what I need remaining. I needed a letter of recommendation from my rater and senior rater, which as an aide is the same person, so that was easy. And then when it came time for the approval process, it just went through branch, and they approved it pretty quickly. And they actually cut my orders, and that was their way of telling me that, hey, yep, you've been approved. So like I said, very, very simple process. And the biggest stipulation is that you've kind of already started to work on that. And then the OBAC to the Army is the same as just about every other program, 3 days for every 1 day in school.
Okay, so you don't have a utilization tour, but you do have an ADSO.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Laura, what about you? How did that work with your application? And you can either talk about master's degree or PhD with your application to teach at West Point and then to grad school.
Yeah. So with ACS, and it's the Advanced Civil Schooling is what kind of the program is. It's backwards, and everybody at school tells me that. You basically apply for the teaching position through the department, and that's through 1 year, and then the following year you then apply to actually go to your graduate program. Then you go to the graduate program for 2 years, and then you go back to teach. So you're starting about 5 years out, which is pretty interesting. So applying through West Point, it's through the West system, and you can go on USMA.edu. One of the things I recommend for going back to teach is apply to multiple departments. Sometimes you have various interests. I know I was a major in chemistry. We already talked through that, but I was also a systems engineer track. So just going and seeing a couple different ideas of things that I would possibly enjoy. That was part of that application. So applying to teach multiple departments, you got DMI, I didn't apply to DPE, but then the academic departments, as well as the Eisenhower program, which is, as a tech. So there's lots of different options, and you can also do a graduate degree at Columbia. I think it's in organizational psychology to become a TAC through BSNL. So increasing your chances, increasing your odds, if you really want to go back and have them fund your degree. That's one of the best ways to do that. And then it was really much more informal the second time around. I would say for both times, stay connected with some of the departments and some of the faculty members where you took classes. I think they maintain distro lists of interested cadets or cadets that did well. And oftentimes they'll send out interest emails. And take a look at your timeline as well. You only have about, I think, like a 3 to 5 year sweet spot of finishing company command, going to 2 years of grad school, teaching for 2 to 3 years, and doing ILE, whether it's distance learning, resident or satellite, and then still giving yourself time to do your major KD time and be eligible for promotion to lieutenant colonel. So taking a look at what that timeline looks like and making sure that you apply, early enough to where you can still fit that in. And I applied to teach at West Point before I even started company command, even though you have to have your company command OERs. So I got a letter recommendation from my brigade commander, which is a well-known exception in the application process, kind of advocating for how he thinks I would do during command. So not selling yourself short of, hey, I haven't reached that milestone yet, but asking kind of what some of the exceptions are as far as that timeline.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. And Tirzah, I see that you've joined us. Can you give us a little bit of an intro about yourself and talk a little bit about how you are working through funding your degree?
Sure. And my apologies, for some reason it was on my calendar for 7:30. So sorry, everyone. My name is Tirzah VanDamme. I'm 06. I branched med service, but was pilot. So I was medevac for my entire active duty time. I'm now in the reserves, actually doing my reserve duty right now in Tampa. And I have 2 grad school degrees. The first one is from USIS. It's a master's in neuroscience. I started a PhD program in neuroscience there and ended at a master's because I realized a PhD program would not get me where I needed to be. And from there, I went directly to HBS, where I just finished my MBA in May. So yeah, that's a little bit about Me? What other question do you want me to answer now?
How did you go about funding your degree?
Yes.
You did yours after you left service.
I did, yep. So I left active duty, did both as a civilian. So in the health sciences field for PhD programs specifically, I've never seen a PhD program that doesn't have funding for someone, specifically in health sciences in PhD programs. So I got paid to go to school, and that's very typical. It's not like a huge salary by any means, but it's enough to like live very meagerly on, and better than using your GI Bill. And then for my MBA, I used vocational rehab, which is similar to the GI Bill in the benefits that you get. You have to have a service-connected disability of 10% or more. And there's like a little bit of a process to go through with that, but it pays at the GI BAH rate, plus you get all of your school supplies paid for, plus a bunch of other random benefits. And it doesn't necessarily count against your GI Bill. The federal law requires that you can only have 48 months total covered by any federal funding mechanism. So between vocational rehab and the GI Bill, you can't do more than 48 months. So I still have the majority of my GI Bill by using vocational rehab for my MBA.
Awesome. So Laura, you discussed a little bit about some lessons that you learned in your application process. Misa and Tirzah, what did you learn in your application process to your programs, and what, if anything, would you have done differently?
So mine's pretty easy. My application process was very simple. The good thing about K-State is they are very military friendly because they deal with CGSC students every year. So I actually didn't even need to do any letters of recommendation to apply. They did not require the GRE, even though I did have a GRE from when I was at the career course. They just required, like, it was a 2-page essay saying here's what you wanted to study, a couple ideas of what you potentially wanted to write your thesis on, and a writing sample. Like I said, I submitted my social paper. So it was, like I said, it was very, very simple process. While I was applying to K-State, I was also serving full-time as an aide, traveling a ton, and planning my wedding. So I was able to knock all that out, and I don't know, maybe I'm just a very type A person.
You're definitely a Western woman.
Yes. I'm also a Apache pilot, so it's all the stereotypes, I'm sure. So that was pretty simple. And then for degree completion, like I said, I had a really great relationship with my branch manager. So he just was constantly, anytime he had questions or issues, he was talking to me. And we really worked together well to try to get the degree completion. I mean, it was just a couple memos. Like I said, it was a pretty simple process. But for me, like I said, it was very easy because K-State was military friendly. So I think that was in my favor.
For me, so for health sciences, my lessons learned are to reach out to professors before you even consider applying, because it's a very networked approach. And I would say that's probably the case for any small program, any small graduate program, because in health sciences, you typically have 10 or less in your field that gets admitted every year, and that's almost any school. So it's pretty, it's a very network based, which I had no idea, because most people go get their MBAs when they finish school. So for the MBA, I would say don't do what I did. I applied within like 2 weeks of the application being due. Or that's when I decided I was going to apply. I think I actually hit submit about 2 days before it was due. I would say that that's not the norm. And my advice would be to reach out to the Vets Club, any of the big schools, to get at least a resume review to make sure that it's kind of in line with with what they're looking at. And I mean, I think MBA programs in general are kind of throwing a dart at the board on whether or not you get into that particular program, because it's a numbers game for them on their diversity, and you are competing against other vets. So you're not competing against the consultant that is coming in, but it is kind of it's kind of a shot in the dark. So don't get discouraged if you don't get into one school, but you get into another, because roll of the dice.
Yeah, Tirzah, that seems to echo a little bit of what Laura was saying about really understanding the program that you're getting into, and if you can find a way to get in, and try to find those ways and network as much as you can. Laura, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I had a note jotted down about letters of recommendation. So honestly, I feel like when I was applying to my master's program, I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I wanted to study. I didn't really know what sociology was. Like it was very exploratory, which honestly I think was really one of the benefits of it. So it all worked out. But when I was applying to teach at West Point, it was definitely leader, Army, validate kind of my performance and my character, which those are things that BSNL was looking for. When I was looking at grad school for Duke, it was still very Army centric. There were, a couple people that were, my father was military, so honestly, I have some connections of retired senior officers that had been like working in the academic world. So I felt like having, one or two people that somewhat understand the academic world of what, these schools are looking for, who can speak to your potential for critical thought, writing, just problem solving, depending on what field you're going into. And then when I applied for my PhD, I knew very much that, they just, not that they don't care, but they don't care about, the things that I've done in the military. I'm getting a PhD in management. So yes, my experiences, all of the insights are absolutely something that I bring to the table. But they want to hear from other, doctorate completed people that can validate that I, can research, that I have, insights and intrigue and that kind of curiosity. So again, I did 2 years of applications, and I cut out a couple people that were letters of recommendation writers the first time. And they were absolutely phenomenal, emotional and morale support, and very much encouragers, in my life and in my career. But I went back to grad school and enhanced the number of people that I had from grad school write letters of recommendation, because they were already on that same playing field. And then kind of broadening my horizon as far as, somebody that was a little bit nuanced, maybe somebody that knew somebody at the school that I was applying to. I 100% agree with Tirzah in that you cannot be an unknown going into applying in these programs. So a lot of the ones that I applied to took 1 to 2 per year. And so that's why you apply broadly. I think it was a lot easier to get into a master's program, and significantly more difficult to get into a PhD. So it's interesting on writing letters of recommendation or requesting letters of recommendation.
No, I think that's a really good point, Laura. And as I've done, different things throughout my career and trying to look at different options, those people that perhaps the best and you feel are your best mentors aren't necessarily the right people to write a letter in a certain regard. And understanding how can I expand my network in order to find the right people that can help me in this capacity. And I'm not dismissing what this person has done for me in my life or who this person is continuing to be in my life, but for this particular situation, it may not be the right fit. So kind of expanding that, I think, is a really good lesson. For both Laura and Misa, since you're both still in service, and Laura, obviously you talked about deciding you wanted to teach versus staying operational, but how has the decision of graduate school affected your career decisions? How has that been met with by different leaders in your career? And what kind of advice or lessons learned have you experienced that you would, caution or advise people that are considering pursuing advanced degrees while still serving?
So I'll start, if you don't mind. So when I was applying and I was going through all this, especially for degree completion, I had a very fortunate position where I was serving as an aide-de-camp for a female two-star general. So I had a lot of mentorship and encouragement to kind of take charge of my career and try to help shape it. And I think that was really where degree completion in grad school helped me. So I did 2 years of command, and I really only had 2 years before ILE and CGSC. So I had to kind of figure out how I wanted to use those. I could have used my grad but I ended up opting to do a 1 year as an aide-de-camp. So as I looked at what I was going to do with that extra year in between, I didn't want to have something where I felt like I was not contributing to my future career. So I wanted to continue to study and to learn. And I think the degree completion is very nice not having a utilization tour, especially if you're in a job like I am, where I'm an aviator. I've already been out of the cockpit for a little over a year. So by the time I get back into flying again, it'll have been 3 years. So I really couldn't imagine having to add an additional 3 years for utilization tour. I just would not be competitive within the aviation branch. It would have been very difficult. I always had originally wanted to actually go back and teach at West Point, but it just didn't work out with my timeline based on having a second command and then really just the way that my career worked out. But I do appreciate the fact that I do have an opportunity to continue to get my degree and then really just hop right back into the Army. So it's almost like I'm getting a little sabbatical from the Army, which is nice. The one thing that I do have to do is I link in with the K-State ROTC program, and really I just help out where they need me. They said I'll help grade some PT tests and things like that. They're very flexible. But other than that, I'm pretty much a civilian for a year. So it really doesn't have a huge impact in terms of career timeline, but I think especially with what I'm studying, it's going to be very fortunate to help me with broadening my perspectives, especially as I move into being a company grade officer into a field grade officer, and actually going into CGSC, pending the board results if I get resident in CGSC as well. What I'm going to be studying for my thesis is I'm going to study the end of non-conventional conflict. So think, why are we pulling out of Syria? So a very apt thing for both being in the military and current events. So I think it's something that I'm passionate about. And I think having this ability to immersively study is really going to help to bring that perspective and help with these discussions that I have with my peers when I go to CGSC and I serve as a field grade.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think great point on that transition from company grade to field grade. So most people will go into grad school if they do, shortly after, immediately following company command, which is what I did as well. And I commanded a little bit late. I did, several staff jobs. And honestly, I don't feel like I ever really got anything other than support for going back to teach. And it may have been, the way that I messaged it or just the excitement that I had. I will tell you that there are different leaders and different branches that perceive the impact on your career very differently. And it can be, a complete crapshoot based on who you have. And being a battalion S3 and an XO, I've seen that for company grade officers as well, and have helped a couple of them couple of them go back to West Point, as well as one go back for just a regular ACS. And so, yeah, sometimes you'll have very different levels of support, or just absolutely oppose and try to discourage. And that's difficult. And I think part of that is knowing kind of what you want out of it and knowing the risks. So being very well aware of what your timeline looks like. I know that actually two constraints that going to teach at West Point put on my career is one, I got caught in a couple of the year groups where they were really backlogged on resident ILE. And so I ended up doing the 2-year distance learning, where the first year was distance learning, and then the second year they did kind of a hybrid distance and satellite, where they brought instructors to West Point. So I did CGSC in conjunction with teaching at West Point, which was relatively measurable. I'll move on. But what I ended up having to do on the tail end, which is very common for folks coming out of West Point, is I had to go directly into a KD job. And I know that that puts a strain on branch, and I know that at times that will put a strain on the queue for KD positions. And that was really unique in the sense that I had to shop for my own job, and that was not something that I had done before. And so I ended up calling quite a few of my, 2 to 3 year peers who were the battalion XOs, talked to branch about where they thought the queues were the shortest, and where I had the greatest potential of going into a position. And then kind of taking what those options were and just doubling down and doing some of the networking, doing some of the mentor advocating into a position. So I actually went to Fort Riley, which I really, really enjoyed. So I'm super stoked for Misa and her husband. And I owe you some coffee shops. Thank you, Tirzah, for your note. But just knowing that that's going to put a little bit of a strain, but honestly, every broadening assignment that you do is going to come with some sort of trade-off. And so taking a look at what do you really want to do and what will you sacrifice? Doing this time around, as far as being relatively successful in the military, and potentially deciding up front that I'm going to take myself out of the running for battalion command was a lot more contentious. And it was something that I wasn't broadcasting or advertising, but it was something where even to this point, actually now, I don't have to decide. I can still remain competitive. And going back to teach at West Point, they've still kept that option open, especially in the leadership department. As I finish my PhD, if I'm selected, I'll have to defer battalion command for a year. But West Point is still open to the idea of me going to do battalion command and then going back to West Point 2 years later than originally planned. So there's still ways of navigating that, maintaining an open line of communication with whatever program you're in, and continue to talk to your mentors about what that timeline looks like, and talking to the people whose opinion you value about what your career looks like and what choices you want to make, I think is just kind of a continuous iterative process of what that looks like for you.
From all three of you, I've heard a little bit about kind of networking and relationships and just kind of other people in your lives that have made a difference in kind of your personal journeys, whether it was graduate school or otherwise. How have your relationships been in grad school, either because you're still active duty military or Tirzah as a veteran? Like, how are those relationships with those civilian peers that may or may not have anything in common with you or understand your background?
I can start. So I don't think, I mean, people are curious, but I have not experienced any issues. I think that people might get semi-intimidated if they haven't had any military experience, but at the same time, they're just really intrigued and want to talk to you. They might be afraid to ask questions, but they really want to ask questions. And if you're friendly, they'll just keep on asking you questions. And it's like a great conversation starter. I will say that especially at HBS, I was one of the oldest people in my class. So it was like which Laura's probably experiencing right now. So it was very much a generational gap, which was, I just took it as a way to understand people that were 10 years younger than me, and kind of looked at it as an anthropological type environment. Because they do know a lot, just different things, and not as much life experience. So you have to kind of give them a break. But for networking, the only thing I'll add is don't be afraid to reach out to anyone. I mean, I cold LinkedIn message people all the time. And I would say I get a hit rate of like 90%. So I think it's like pretty good. I mean, I've done a lot of good coffee chats, especially if you offer to buy coffee in only 20 minutes. But same with your peers at school. I would say, like, I made it a point to go to coffee multiple times a week with somebody new that I didn't know, just to kind of understand what their experiences were and what they were about. And it really enhanced my overall experience.
That's awesome. It's interesting, you know, if you enter into a conversation asking people about themselves, anybody's willing to talk, right? Misa, Laura?
So I actually haven't started my school yet in person, but with the video classes that we had, we did come, we actually drove from Leavenworth to K-State a couple times and met with a lot of our classmates, especially the fall semester last year. I definitely agree. It is weird talking to people that are 10 years younger than you, and you're just, you don't see the world the same, but I think I take everything as it's interesting to take in these different perspectives. The two classes that I had that were video-based ones was Latin American Security Studies and Middle Eastern Security Studies. So we had lots of contentious conversations about that, especially having at least half the class that was military, you know, students at CGSC or people that are military here at Fort Riley. It was interesting to kind of see a little bit, but just being respectful in those classroom debates and being able to kind of understand and appreciate the perspectives. The one thing that I will say, and maybe this is just because I was not a CGSC student, but some of the CGSC students that were part of my course, they seemed very negative at times, and I think they were potentially a negative aspect of my peers, and they were more my peers than the civilian students, obviously. But just because there was a lot put on them, the security studies program, they tried to knock that out in a year, and it is a lot. Like I'd read 2 books a week, and I you know, doing my full-time job, and having CGSC students do even more than that. That was a lot to ask for them. So I know that some of my CGSC peers were a little negative. So if anyone's, you know, attending CGSC or getting ready to do that, just kind of expectation management. And I mean, you don't have to finish something in a full year. Like you can try to make it work for you, because I think the program it is what you put into it, you get out of it. And you know, I feel bad for those guys. My heart went out to them. They were overly stressed.
And I think, Misa, that kind of echoes the question of why are you pursuing a master's degree? What is it that you want to get out of it? And really being honest with yourself about, do I just want a degree because I think that's going to help me militarily to have a master's degree? Or what is it why am I investing my time and energy into this program?
Yeah, and I think that was the thing that kind of struck me is some of my peers that were in CGSC. I was like, oh, are you really passionate about your thesis topic? Because I'm such a nerd and I'm so excited to start my thesis this year. And they're like, no, I could care less. I'm like, what? You know, so I think for me, especially being in a degree program that's very writing intensive and has a thesis, I think it's important to study something you're passionate about. Just my own 2 cents.
Ditto. I'll echo that. As far as peers, so just like Tirzah mentioned, I am 9.5 or 10 years older than the next guy, who's great. Also went to Duke, so we already have Duke basketball in common. It's awesome. And I think that's part of it. And honestly, I will say that I'm in a similar life stage in the fact that I'm single. And so I think, you know, being married and having kids oftentimes will be another differentiator, but can also be a unique opportunity to be kind of a big brother, big sister type of mentor. And I feel like I was able to do a little bit of that, and I'm, you know, looking forward to doing that. You know, I'm already in orientation and doing that a little bit with, you know, some of my colleagues here, in the sense that you can have a little bit of that life advice. I'm a huge planner and organizer and Excel nerd. And so I started kind of putting together my research strategy, if you will, of how to get through this thing in 3 years. And one of the girls that's in the PhD program with me here, she's like, yeah, I have this to-do list and I kind of randomly pick which ones I want to do. I'm like, oh my gosh, it stresses me out. And so one of the other girls said, hey, Laura, I hear you have this really intimidating Excel spreadsheet of your career timeline. Would you mind sharing it? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You know, and I said, hey, if you see things on there that you're like, hey, I think, you know, as far as your research pipeline and the order of developing research, let me know some things, because a lot of times you just have complementary skills. And I think that's the really cool thing to pull out of those relationships. I'm not going to be the best at stats. I'm not going to be the most read up in some of the literature that some of the research assistants that have been doing that for the last 2 years. But I do have life experiences, and I have, you know, leadership insights, that those are oftentimes a lot of the things that they're really interested and excited to hear about. The other aspect I thought was just find common interests. And so, as I mentioned, I went to a ton of basketball games, and that was a really cool opportunity to get to know a lot of the other Duke Masters program people. And then I joined an Ultimate Frisbee club, which was almost all undergrad girls. And I became the soccer mom, and, you know, brought the, you know, orange slices and pickles and Gatorade. And I still stay in contact with a lot of those girls. And that's actually been a really rewarding experience. So complementing their personalities and just kind of getting to know them for who they are. I also think that really helped me be able to relate and get to know a lot of my cadets, because they were in that similar life stage, just a couple years behind.
Yeah, as you're talking, Laura, it makes me think of, I'll give a shout out to Katie Matthew, who's also going to be going back to teach in BSNL. And we had lunch, I don't know, a couple of months ago, and she was talking about essentially cooperate and graduate, which none of you have said, but, you know, big thing at this point. And the idea that with your peers, you have different experiences. So what can you guys each bring to the table to leverage each other, to help each other towards that graduation goal?
If I can add, sorry, one more thing, and I think this is something that like our PhD program has like told us, is also have something outside of school. Have friendships, have relationships, have some sort of activity that helps you kind of balance that. That when you have a bad day at school, like it's not all your eggs in one basket. But I also, when I was choosing my school here, I have a couple West Point classmates that live here in Boston. You know, we have the veterans organization here that I'm becoming part of. And then I have a church that, you know, there's a couple folks that already introduced me to friends before I got here. So that was really important. And I've heard that from quite a few different people in the academic community, about just success in academia, of making sure that, you know, whether it's your kids, that you get to go home and, you know, look at and say, you know, nothing at work is bad enough, you know, when I look at my kid. And so finding that for yourself, and that may play into where you decide to go to school or what you decide to study as well.
Yeah, and that makes me think of our conversation years ago about you deciding on Duke as your graduate school. Okay, so obviously there are bad days in school. There are tests that you don't perform as well as you would like, but we're not going to, you know, close this out on a somber note. Best experience in graduate school so far?
This is easy for me. So I was lucky enough that my husband is still active duty, and he was picked up for ACS. So he was at the Harvard Kennedy School for a 1-year mid-career program last year while I was at the business school. So we were in Cambridge together, which was amazing. But because of him, I was able to go on a trip, a student-led trip to Israel, led by a bunch of Israeli students. It was a very geopolitical trip, but it was over spring break, and that was like hands down the best experience that I had at business school, because it was meeting a lot of different people in a very unique place in the world, at a very unique time in the world. Yeah.
So I think my best experience is probably yet to come. I've only really done online and video, but I think as we were talking about cooperate and graduate, one thing that I did, because like I said, I'm pretty nerdy, I take notes every time I did readings, and I used to send those out to my classmates, and I mean, them just saying like, hey, I could not have gotten through that boring class discussion if I wasn't looking down at your notes, and had some help with that, especially the CGSC students. I think that was probably a good experience, feeling like I was helping out my classmates and contributing, you know, because I at least had a little more extra time to work on something than they maybe did. So hopefully I'll have more experiences. I plan on, you know, football games and basketball games and all that good stuff here, and hopefully meeting new people and getting that experience as well.
So since I already talked about basketball like 5 times, we know that that was super exciting. But I will say that honestly, I feel like graduate school, you know, both the first time and now even just being here for like 3 weeks now, I think gave me just like some mental and, you know, kind of work and, you know, emotional space to kind of reflect. And, you know, I'm going to be studying identities and, identity transitions and development and leader development. And I think it's just a really pretty cool opportunity to explore kind of a different part of my life. Invest in some relationships. I know the last 3 years were really, really hard. So I was battalion S3, battalion XO, and then deputy G3 of a division. And it was like, I had no time for myself, and like literally I was sitting, I strategically positioned myself to where I was looking out a window, and I sat and read for like 3 hours this morning. And it was, personally, kind of stretching myself and gaining perspective on a new kind of part of life. So I think just having that opportunity to grow a little bit, both, academically, intellectually, socially, personally, just in all sorts of different ways. It's really, really special. And I know I'm really blessed to have the opportunity again.
I love it. I'm so excited to hear from all of you guys. And I think you each, have very different paths in a graduate school, and the experiences that you've had, I think, are really phenomenal. And last question before we wrap this thing up. How has grad school, or how do you expect that grad school is going to help you achieve your goals in life?
Well, I can start. I think, again, the first time around, again, studying sociology, what I've kind of discovered about myself is that really, one of my passions and purpose in life is mentorship and development. And I think that grad school in and of itself and all different facets had made me a better S3 and XO and a better mentor. And the second time around is going to do the same. With the opportunity to still do battalion command and then teach and mentor and study and help leaders kind of enhance their own abilities. So I feel like it took me a little while to kind of navigate a little bit of bracketing, a little exploration to figure out what I wanted to do. But grad school was part of that, and I feel like, has revealed what that is and is going to help me get there.
I think for me, grad school has helped me to kind of exercise some of that rational thinking and communication ability, especially with studying security studies and the origins of conflict and all of that. I feel like it just increased my interest in current events a lot more. I used to never read the news, or I was awful. I only studied aviation stuff because that is the majority of my job. But I feel like I'm going to go into my field grade years with a broader base of knowledge, a better understanding of different perspectives, and a better understanding, like I said, of conflict and why we're actually going and deploying to the places we are. And look forward to sharing that and helping out. And I think the good thing as well with my grad school degree, K-State also works with SAMs. So if I eventually want to go do that, it would actually go towards my PhD. So I do have options and flexibility in my future, which is something that's exciting, especially as I get back into being passionate about going to school.
For me, I think grad school really
Oh man, Tirzah, it looks like we lost.
I need to reach my goals. Maybe I'm back. Am I back?
You're back.
Okay. I am using hotel Wi-Fi, so I think that it gave me the very basic tools I needed in understanding of neuroscience and of business. HBS in particular just opens a few more doors. It like gets you a conversation. But having a unique degree in neuroscience also will get you a conversation. But it's just the foundation to reaching goals.
Well, ladies, again, I sincerely appreciate your time that you've invested over the course of this month to lead up to this panel, and then your time to share your experiences tonight. I'm sure you're all willing to answer any questions. If any of our women have further questions, this will be posted online so other people can see it. And if anybody has any questions for our panelists, please don't hesitate to reach out. And going forward, we'll continue to do this monthly with different categories, different topics that we'll talk about. So ladies, I will give you the floor for any closing thoughts, and then we will wrap it up for the evening.
I can start. So closing thoughts for me are, don't let people tell you that grad school is not going to fit into your career. You can always find a way. If that is something that you want to do, it's something that's not even good. It's going to help you both in the military and outside. You know, I'm right at the 10-year mark almost, and trying to decide, do I want to make a career out of it, dual military? I just started, haven't been married a year yet, so still trying to figure out all that. Just having a graduate degree, as Tirzah said, it opens a lot of doors, and it helps you to kind of figure out really what career path you may want to take, both within the military and outside. So take a look at all the options. There's so many different options available, even ones that we didn't discuss here. And you know, if it's something that you want to do, you can make it work. Fight for your own career.
I think something very, very similar. I mean, do what's best for you, not what other people think is best for you. And you know that whatever that may be. And if it's not, like, you don't need to stay in, you don't need to go get command. You can do, I mean, everyone has a very unique career path. And I will say, the more diverse your military assignments are, the more competitive you are once you get out. So you don't need to go on the traditional path if that's not what you personally want to do. And if it is, then go forth and conquer. But that's my parting words.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of talking about, just, figuring out kind of what you want to do. And I think part of it can be a little scary. As a lot of us talked about, being able to write an essay about what you want to study, and you may not have a clue. And I think part of that is, be okay with starting broad, and explore different ideas, explore different, disciplines, different, realms of, just different things that you might find interesting, as well as what Misa said, different options or methods of getting there. The other thing I will say, though, is plan ahead. So while you can, do a lot of different things, not necessarily at the last minute or, with different ways, don't close doors unnecessarily because you didn't start something soon enough. So it's always easy to wait and, revise your letters and, follow up and do it a year later. But sometimes once the deadline passes, or you're already within your window for promotion, just depending on what program you're doing, you may lose the opportunity. And then the last thing I'll say is just kind of echoing what Tirzah said, is allow yourself to be broadened. But at the same time, just navigating kind of the social pressures and expectations of your role models and, this institution of the Army, honestly, is really hard. There's a lot of pressure, and we seek kind of that social validation from people that we admire. So just giving yourself that opportunity to reflect, that I think a lot of times comes kind of in the early to mid field grade years, when you start thinking, like, what do I want to do when I grow up? And you start to have a little bit of that confidence of, maybe I want to go this way, or maybe I want to go this way. So giving yourself that reflection opportunity and seeking out the people whose opinion you value. And then have fun. Gosh, give yourself a break. Go to some basketball games.
Awesome. Well, ladies, again, sincerely, I appreciate your time and effort that you've put into this month. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom tonight. I'm sure there are people out there that are trying to figure out, what is the next step they're going to take, whether it's inside or outside of the military. And